Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon. I call this meeting of the Audit Committee meeting on Monday, March 23rd, 2020 to order. Welcome to those watching at home or online. I want to note that we have a number of committee members on the phone. To ensure we have a quorum, I'm going to ask for a roll call of our members. Please respond here as your name is called by the city clerk.
Committee members Brecky,
Here.
Buckneberg,
Here.
Gotch,
Here.
Grant,
Here.
Kylie,
Here.
Neitzert,
Here.
Sale.
Here.
Thank you. I can confirm that we have a quorum of the Audit Committee in attendance. For all of those on the phone, I want to remind you to mute your phone when you're not speaking. We have presenters on the phone who will need to speak, and everyone in the room and watching online will be able to hear you. For the order of the meeting, please remember to mute when not speaking. When making or seconding a motion, if you could please state your name so we can accurately reflect who made the motion in our minutes, that would be great. And thank you for your cooperation. Before we begin, I want to make a few remarks for the benefit of the general public. First, wherever possible, we're encouraged to limit public social gatherings. In that spirit, we have encouraged most of our members to attend remotely. In addition, we have limited physical attendance of staff and presenters to only those who need to be here. We've also implemented social distancing measures here in the council chambers. Although we try our best to limit gatherings, we also have to continue to execute the business of city government. We have a statutory requirement to accept the external audit of the city as an audit committee. It must then be published and forwarded to the City Council, the Department of Legislative Audit, and to our official newspaper. At this meeting, the full audit of the city, referred to as the CAFR, or the Certified Annual Financial Report, will be published on the city website shortly after the meeting and available to the City Council. That's the purpose of the meeting today. The CAFR was sent to the Audit Committee shortly before the meeting. And to limit attendance of others, we've removed all other agenda items that are not time sensitive, and we look forward to addressing those other items at future meetings. Please note this is a public meeting subject to open meetings laws. While we encourage people to watch at home, we cannot prevent someone from attending in person, and the meeting remains open to any interested parties. So with that, let's get to the agenda. Our first item requiring action is agenda item 2A, the approval of the minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on Monday, December 2nd, 2019. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Move to approve Brecky.
So that's a motion by Kylie, seconded by Brecky. And I should note that we have to do a roll call for all votes when we have a teleconference required by state law. So I'm going to ask for a roll call. Those in favor of approving the minutes vote yes. Those opposed vote no.
Committee members Brecky,
Yes.
Buckneberg,
Yes.
Gotch,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Kylie,
Yes.
Neitzert,
Yes.
Sale.
Yes.
Thank you. The minutes are approved unanimously. Our next agenda item is 3A, the external audit results, City of Sioux Falls 2019 financial statements, presented by Eide Bailey. Our presentation will be made by Brian Stavanger of Eide Bailey, who is on the line. I also want to reference that we also have finance in attendance for our committee members if there's questions from them as well. So Brian, if you are ready, we're ready for you to take it away.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for having me. Brian Stavanger, a partner with Eide Bailey, working out of our Fargo office. I've worked with the city for many, many years, and really it's a combination of individuals from Fargo and our Sioux Falls office who work with the city, with staff, through the audit committee to complete the audit process on an annual basis. As we go through, or as I take you through this presentation, it's fairly short. Shauna is assisting me in advancing the slides as we go through. Being that I am not on site and able to visualize and see, and many of the members also are not on site, I will pause at the conclusion of each slide to allow time for questions and added commentary. So if you hear some silence, that will be intentional to make sure that I allow for anyone to get their questions in or make additional comments. So going from the cover page of the presentation to slide 2. Slide 2 at the top has service team. I last met with the audit committee in December, your last meeting that was held, and we introduced the service team at that time as well. It was noted that this was going to be Keith Severson's last meeting as the communication partner and representative from the Sioux Falls office. Unfortunately, because of all of these circumstances, Keith was not able to attend today, but he wants to thank you for everything and the relationships over the years, and sincerely wishes he could have been here. So he is retiring in about 5 weeks or 6 weeks, and Joy will be taking over as communications partner. She was in attendance in December and was introduced to you. Also works with several entities in the city and affiliated with the city, so is very familiar with the operation. Myself, Brian, leads as the engagement partner, really from the technical side. We've got a manager in our Fargo office, Courtney Richmond, who has worked with the city as well for many, many years. And then we complete the staff members with a combination from Sioux Falls and Fargo senior associates and associates to complete the audit in a timely manner. The next slide is really a transition slide to go through the recap of the audit. So we'll move right into the following slide. At the top, it has Audit Recap. As we go through and complete our audit, we are bound by several different standards. There's really 3 standards that we are bound by. One would be the generally accepted auditing standards. Those are standards that apply to any audit that is being conducted. We also have 2 additional standards that we follow. Government auditing standards, really because the city operates as a local government as well as receives federal and state funds, we must follow government auditing standards, which are just a little bit more stringent, a little bit more detailed than the overall generally accepted auditing standards. And then we also follow Title II U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, also known as CFR, and that really guides us as we audit just the federal funding that the city receives and spends throughout the year. As we are going through our audit, we are designing that to obtain reasonable but not absolute assurance about whether these financial statements, and when I say financial statements, really referring to the CAFR, that Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, we're making sure that they are free of material misstatement. It's very, very important, though, to point out that we are not obtaining absolute assurance, and that is because we are really looking at and testing on a sample basis. We're not looking at everything 100%, therefore we cannot provide that absolute assurance, but we do perform our testing to ensure that we can obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatement. I'll pause there briefly before moving on to the next slide if anyone has any questions or comments. Okay, the next slide, which on the right-hand side has the word timeline. So just to give you a refresher on the timeline of the audit, we complete our planning procedures really beginning in November and continuing through December. As a part of that, we meet with you, the audit committee, and we did that on December 2nd. Just a couple of weeks following that meeting, we began our interim testing. We did that the week of December 16th. We spend a few days doing kind of our initial testing, looking at transactions through an interim period, really getting a head start on the full audit process. We follow that up with some year-end testing, and we split that into 2 separate site visits to City Hall, the last week in January and then the last week in February, and we continue as we correspond and wrap up our testing into March. A lot of work is done in March, not only by the audit team, but also the staff at the city. The CAFR that is issued each year, the vast majority of that is put together or I should say almost entirely put together by city staff. A lot of that work is done in March. We end up then issuing our audit opinion. We issued that on Friday, March 20th, and here today to report to you the results of that audit. So I'll pause before moving on to the next slide to see if anyone has any questions or comments on the timelines. Okay, let's get into the results of the audit. So the next slide on the right-hand side has financial statements. So really when we provide our opinion, we're providing really two separate opinions, one on the full CAFR, the financial statements, and then a separate one, which we'll address on the next slide, just related to the federal funds. So the first one here, financial statements, received an unmodified opinion. And what that means is based on all of the work that we did as auditors, we arrived at a point where we determined to give a clean, unmodified opinion, meaning we didn't believe there were any misstatements in the CAFR. Everything is accurately stated. All required disclosures are in that document, a clean, unmodified opinion. That's the best opinion you can receive and really the one you strive for each and every year when you go through this audit. Throughout this year's audit, and really internally at the city, there was the implementation of a new governmental accounting standard, GASB 84, which covers fiduciary activities. And really all this does is now in the CAFR is an inclusion of cash in the police department evidence room at December 31st, 2019. This was a new standard that came out and was in effect for 2019, where it was required to report as essentially as custodial funds on hand that aren't necessarily the city's, but they are being held by the city at the end of the year. Those amounted to about $331,000 of cash on hand. What we did in regards to that, we performed an observation of those cash funds, as well as gained an understanding of the evidence handling and procedures manual. We included our forensic professionals in that review of that manual and noted no issues of concern. As it relates to the financial statement audit, we had no findings. That's the third bullet on that page. And we also spend a lot of time looking at understanding and analyzing significant estimates. Significant estimates are a little more challenging to audit because they are estimates. If we are auditing cash or we are auditing property tax revenue, state aid revenue, those are items that we can confirm with outside parties, or we can do procedures around that to get comfortable. You know, they really do exist. They really were received. Significant estimates are different because management needs to make an estimate at the end of the year. Some examples of that are incurred but not reported, or IBNR, workers' compensation reserve, OPEB, which stands for other post-employment benefits, landfill and future landfill liabilities, and really the biggest ones, the pension asset or the pension liabilities. Those are estimates made by management with the assistance of other outside professionals, such as actuaries. So we spent a little bit more time understanding and getting comfortable with those estimates, and also had no issues with any of those in 2019. So I'll pause again before moving on to the next slide if anyone has any questions or comments.
Brian, this is Councillor Neitzer. Just curious, how do you determine whether expected rates of return, and actuarial estimates are reasonable?
The way that there is some reliance on the actuaries in that process. They're professionals who work with a lot of different entities to determine those rates. But we also look at other governments who are obtaining actuarial calculations, and we're looking at other actuarial firms, and we are comparing across the spectrum what are the rates that are being used to essentially come to a conclusion that we believe there's no significant outliers amongst any of those actuarials. So really, comparison amongst different actuarial firms, as well as talking with management and making sure that they're comfortable as well.
Thank you.
Hearing no other questions, we'll move on to the next slide. The next slide is focusing on the federal audit. Federal audit is along the right-hand side of this slide. So this is where we are testing only federal dollars that are spent by the city during 2019. We're not testing that 100%. There is guidance guidance issued by the federal government that says we want you to look at a certain dollar amount and to hit a certain threshold of the total, and we want you to look at those programs to get over that threshold. So there are several programs, several federal programs that send money to the city, and the city spends those dollars. We looked at 2 programs this year, as was required by those guidelines issued by the federal government. Those 2 programs that we looked at were the Health Center and Federal Transit. So when we are looking at those federal programs, we are looking at not only the dollars that are being spent and making sure they're being spent appropriately according to the grant agreements, according to the way that they're supposed to be. But we're also looking at internal controls, making sure that internal controls are strong to support proper compliance and proper spending. So our opinion, when we give one, is really focused on both compliance and internal controls over compliance. For that federal audit, also had a clean, unmodified opinion and had no findings as it relates to compliance or internal control over compliance. So overall, a good, clean result on that federal audit. Any questions or comments on the federal audit? Okay, moving on to the next slide, which is really the last one that has anything substantial on it. We've got a few final slides after it, asking for final questions and a big thank you, but this will be the last one with some substance. This is management letter. Management letter is on the right-hand side. So this CAFR is issued within the CAFR, of which, like I said earlier, the majority of it is prepared by management. But within that CAFR is our opinion on the financial statements and our opinion on the federal audit. Issued separately is a management letter. That management letter is something that we issue that has various required communication to the audit committee, city council, and management. A lot of it required communication. That's really nothing out of the ordinary. But one item here wanted to point out to you would be past adjustments in that management letter. So what this means is as we perform our audit and we're going through all of our procedures, we're essentially verifying the dollar amounts, the various dollar amounts that management says exist for assets, liabilities, revenues, expenses. As we perform our audit, if we find differences between what management has as dollar amounts, we then analyze those differences based on thresholds that we audit by. Essentially, there's a floor and a ceiling. Any differences that are below that floor, we can just ignore altogether from an audit standpoint. We can say it's immaterial. Anything over the ceiling or anything greater than the ceiling is where we need to have a discussion about making an adjustment or adjusting what's reported in that CAFR to what we believe as auditors is the correct number. If we have any of those adjustments that are above that ceiling, that would then result in a formal finding. So as 2 slides prior to that on the financial statements, there were no findings, meaning we did not have any adjustments that we found that were above that ceiling threshold. Then anything between the floor and the ceiling, we just need to document and report in this management letter. So not an adjustment that was made, but an adjustment that was more significant than an immaterial amount and something we just need to bring to the attention of management. And I think this is a good thing. These are some of the larger issues that can come up during an audit, and we just are here to make you aware of some of those issues that we discussed with management as we go through the audit. So we had 2 past adjustments. And what that means is we were able to pass on actually making the adjustment in the CAFR, but they were significant enough where we needed to point them out in the management letter. The first one, the Sales and Use Tax Fund, this is actually a repeat from last year, from the 2018 audit. There was about a $562,000 receivable due from the State Department of Transportation that was recognized as a revenue in 2017, but has still not actually been received from the DOT. So the technical way to account for that is not to report it as revenue, but to report it as a deferred revenue because the cash has not been received yet. As I mentioned, this was first reported in the 2018 audit. Really, circumstances have not changed throughout the 2019 audit, so that receivable still exists, and again, technically should be reported as a deferred revenue, but was recognized as revenue in 2017. So just pointing that out once again. It is anticipated to be received in 2020, at which time this would all go away. And then the second past adjustment for 2019 was in the Electric Light Fund, just under $24,000 of construction activity that should have been recorded in 2018, but was not, and instead was first reported in 2019. Those are the 2 past adjustments in that management letter in 2019, so I'll pause there and allow for any questions or comments. Okay, moving on to the next slide, which allows for any final questions. Anything related to the audit, anything that I previously discussed on any of these slides, or maybe something I didn't that you had an interest in asking a question on, we'll allow for some time for those questions as well.
Anyone on the phone have any questions, comments? Hearing none, sounds like no questions. Anything else for us, Brian?
Well, I think just a big thank you to the audit committee members, to the internal audit, Shauna and everyone there, the finance department, Sean, Tom, Cody, and everyone else. We are reporting this year, I believe we're about a month ahead of the timeline compared to last year. To be able to complete, wrap up, and issue an audit for the city of Sioux Falls, a city of that size, and to be able to do that in less than 90 days after year end is truly remarkable. It doesn't just happen at the end of the year, it happens throughout the year as everyone in finance and everyone in internal audit are working to get through everything that they need to get through. To be able to accomplish this before the end of the March is truly remarkable, and a big thank you to all the staff at the city for getting everything ready for us, being timely in responding to all of our questions and requests. Really just a final thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for you and your firm's hard work, and I understand this is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, that we've accomplished this, so great accomplishment for everyone. I want to thank you, and the next thing we're going to look for is a motion, and we're going to need a motion to accept and report and submit the report to the mayor and the city council, so I will look for a motion in a second.
So moved. So moved. This is Bucknaberg.
Okay, so it sounds like we had Kylie moved and Bucknaberg seconded the motion to accept the annual audit of the city. I'm going to look for a roll call vote. Those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no.
Committee members Brecky,
Yes.
Bucknerberg,
Yes.
Scotch,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Kylie,
Yes.
Nitzert,
Yes.
Sale.
Yes.
Thank you. The audit has been accepted unanimously. It will be submitted to the mayor and city council, and it will be published on the finance website very shortly after this meeting. Thank you, Brian. You can hang up if you'd like. Once again, we appreciate all of your work.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. With that, our final item is public comment. Don't see anybody in the room, so I think this can be pretty easy, but anybody who has any public comment has up to 5 minutes to talk about any item on the agenda. Seeing none, I want to thank the audit committee for being flexible. Everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and take care of each other. This meeting is adjourned.